Hello and welcome to episode number 13 of our podcast. My name is Elliot Greenman.
I'm Alexis Enel.
And this week's podcast we spoke about innate resources. And very briefly, why,
in a nutshell,
why do people care about innate resources?
Well, we segregate and we try to bring 8 innate resources to try to help us meet our needs, emotional needs and physical needs actually. So that's quite an interesting thing to really compartmentalize a bit, and so we can discuss things in a bit more precise fashion. Basically.
It feels like in a way that it could be quite an obvious thing, but it's not always that obvious. I always felt like I know what resources I have and use to get my needs met, but I don't think.
But it's a great framework. It's a great framework to be able to figure out which of the needs you need to meet and with using which resources.
Yeah, and the cards we use are Innate IN8 figure 8, made by our friend
Alex Stanfield,
who's a human givens therapist, and
in Trowbridge,
or Trowbridge if you're English, and
no, it's Gloucestershire, mate. Yeah. not Wiltshire. Sorry.
Yeah. So as always, I hope you enjoy the podcast.
Interact with us with social media. Ask us questions. We like to interact with real humans.
Awesome. Enjoy.
Perambulations in franglais. Another great podcast about resources, because I think we talked a lot about all those emotional needs really, and it's always a difficult one really.
Run through the emotional needs again.
So you have volition, you have control, you have the ability to be responsible for your own life and actions. You've got a bit of a sense of security, and whether it's financial or physical. You've got, that's the emotional needs, and you've got a need for status indeed. So how is it you fit in that pyramid of competence,
that hierarchy,
and how much intimacy you need, how much privacy you need, how much meaningful relationship with others you need, how much part of a community you need, how much attention you need to give and receive from others, how much competence you need to feel you have, and how much meaning can you extract from your environment. That's quite an important thing. So that's, and it's of course physical needs. Of course, you need a shelter, you need exercise, you need water, you need proper nutrition. So there's some basic. It's like a plant really. It needs to be watered, put in the light, and have a bit of soil really for it to thrive really. And if you remove one of those three, it's not happening really. So. Yes, physical therapists need to remember that a bit. Nutrition, hydration, exercise, and shelter basically. Yeah. Storm Dennis outside. You don't really want to be exposed to the elements too much, and central heating is a really good stuff, really.
and walls.
That's it, and walls in that case. Also, we can. Look at the resources really, because to fulfill those needs in a balanced fashion, you need a set of tools, basically, in order to be able to meet those needs in a more balanced fashion.
And these set of tools are they mainly to do with the emotional needs?
Yes, yeah. Well, yeah. Maybe,
I guess they might have some link to
the physical needs, but it's like innate resources, really, things that you're kind of born born with. Of course, you've got, for you to be able to exercise, you've got some innate resources, which are spinal reflexes and learning how to walk, all those kind of stuff, really, okay? So you have to have a few resources at hand, really, okay? If possible.
Cool.
So which one do you want to start with? Because I think we got like 8 or something.
Yeah, there's 8, and last
Yeah,
time when we did this podcast and I messed up the video, we went through them in numerical order.
Numerical order.
So
according to the innate cards from Alex Stanfield and Bindi.
Yeah, in 8. So the first one is rational thinking. What does that mean? What is it?
Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. You need access to that rational part of your brain. You need to be able to draw some conclusion which are fairly accurate representation of reality using your left brain, basically. So you need to be quite reasonable, let's call it like that, but rational. So you need to be able to articulate your thoughts. You need to be able to critically analyze things, basically, in order to see if you're fed bullshit or not, really, or whether what you thought was rational, and once you apply it in the world, what the result is. And we say, insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different outcome. Okay? That's a bit the rational mind, really. So your rational mind can step back and help you to figure out a little bit what's happening, really. Okay?
And then the next one, which is probably number 2 for a reason.
That's it for a good reason.
Yeah.
I think it's imagination. You need to be able to have access to different scenarios, really. You need to be a good Quentin Tarantino about the whole lot, really. You need to be able to use your imagination, really.
Yeah.
And solution finding is as well requiring right brain, basically. And it's a bit more of a lateral way of thinking. It's a bit more like correlating type thing. It's quite an interesting way of actually approaching the world as well, really.
Yeah. And can you talk about those two together?
Well, that would make somebody's brain a bit, really. So the two together and used in a balanced fashion tend to help us to fulfill our needs in a balanced fashion.
Yeah. And they're quite like you mentioned, rational thinking is quite left brain. And imagination is
a bit more right brain.
Yeah. And those two used together as a tool can be quite a powerful tool.
Yes, that's it.
Right?
It's people's brains.
Yeah.
Or we talk a lot about theory of mind, Tom, which is there's what's his name, Alec McGilchrist. Can't remember, maybe. Like it's right brain, left brain differences and all those kind of things, really. And now maybe not so clear-cut things are. So the left brain, for example, is really the site of language, mostly the site of language. And therefore, when people have got a stroke or a cerebrovascular accident on their left hemisphere, they lose the ability to speak. Or their ability to speak is impinged at different degree, okay? And men seems to recover their speech far less well than women, because it seems that women seems to use quite a lot of their right brain to engage in language, in a way, okay? So there is a imagination part of language which is more developed in women than men, basically, okay? So that's differences like that between right brain and left brain, and we categorize the two in broad terms when actually it's not really that much the case, really. There's loads of study with people who have had for medical reason. At one stage we were, and maybe still do, I'm not even too sure, we cut the corpus callosum, which is that band of nerve that links the two hemispheres, which is in the middle, okay? And therefore the two hemispheres can talk to each other, okay? And the change in people's personality and the way they interact with the world when that part of the brain is cut is helping us to differentiate the right and the left, in a way, okay? And when one looks at it only, and the two look at it together, and the slight differences they are, okay? And it's really interesting neuroscience type stuff and psychiatry type thing to treat people with epilepsy or things like that, really, okay? So it's still subject to lots of research. It's very interesting.
Yeah,
it's amazing, really.
Relatively young way of looking.
That's it. Looking at it. Yeah.
And can you talk about these two, rational thinking and imagination, with regards to? And I guess this is actually applicable to all of the innate resources, but with regards to card texture.
So if you fall into too much of rational thinking or too much of imagination, your perception of reality gets warped.
And because it lacks, if you think about these two working in as like a seesaw or in tandem, it lacks the complementary.
That's it.
The complementary resource in a
the
way.
main thing as well is the observing self. That in the case is the number 8. In our cards here, the observing self is quite an important thing, because you're not a horse, or you're not a cow, you're not a monkey, you're not a dolphin, you're a human, and you're a quite special human. The last 40,000 years, roughly, we're not too sure exactly, we became conscious of being conscious. So we're able to actually step out of ourselves in our mind and observe ourselves being conscious. And that's really a resource that helps us to look at whether our imagination or our rational thinking is taking over a bit too much, really, in a way. So we're able to look out, and we need to be able to look in as well with our observing self, really.
And with card texture, you become too focused on, it's contextually blind, so you become too focused on one thing.
On one thing, or too externally or internally focused, in a way, really.
And then that can limit your access to rational thinking and imagination, or above that, observing yourself. So you might not be able to observe yourself, that you are contextually locked in on one thing.
Yeah.
And that thing that you're locked in on, you might be too rational or too left brain,
or too imaginative into your right brain.
Yeah.
It's really like we need to be apologized for having a bit of a very crude and simplistic way of describing it. But it's an interesting way of doing it, because it's more than complicated. It's more than complex. It's actually complicated, which actually adds more. Yeah.
On top of it.
That's it. A horse is complex, but it's not complicated. Okay, because he's not able to be conscious of being conscious, and we've got that extra thing which add another thing. Because you're conscious of being conscious, and you're both at the same time. So when you add that extra layer, you add actually two things, which makes it interesting.
Complicated.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so rational thinking 1, imagination 2, and number 3 is memory.
Well, for us to not be too insane and repeating the same thing again and again and trying to achieve a different outcome, we need to be able to tap into our memory, basically. And it can trick us a bit. So, I was doing that when I was 15, and now I'm 45, and the outcome is a bit different to when I was 15, but I still do it. So we are not using our memory in the right fashion at times, or we use it to try to do it in the right fashion. So, yeah, that's quite an important part of it, really.
How can people I'm guessing with these innate resources, they're kind of there's an assumption that we have almost like a control over them or access to them, a conscious
access to your memories.
Yeah,
of course. Yeah.
So.
Well, it's long-term memories and short-term memories. So here we talk about having access to long-term memories mostly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And is it trying to make your memory better, or is it?
No, the memory can't be changed.
Yeah.
But there's only one part of the whole lot, really. The main thing with memories is, and a bit of all of that is, and the main thing is emotion. The main thing is you've associated an emotional state to your memory, which actually warps your view of things at times. So you chase how it felt. So it's part of the addiction type thing a bit. You are not so much addicted to the substance as you are addicted to the expectation of how it's going to make you feel.
Of the emotion.
And that's really quite an interesting way of the whole lot. You pattern match, so that's another of the needs or the resources, sorry. But the activating agent, the need you try to fulfill in a balanced fashion is pattern matched, is linked to an emotion. Okay? And then you've got a thought. So depending on the memory you have of how you were able to fulfill that need and how it made you feel, the next time you feel like that, you maybe think that the emotional need is met. But maybe it's not, because the world is changing. Okay? And that's where we go into trauma and all those kind of stuff, really. When you're a bit traumatized, you have actually completely linked. It's not very a flexible pattern matching ability, basically. You've branded or alchemically linked the whole two elements together, and they make one, in a way. But it actually prevents you from definitely meeting the need again, really. Okay, and your thoughts start to get a bit irrational or too rational, whatever.
And irrational is just imagination going a bit wild.
A
maybe.
Bit wild.
Yeah.
That's it.
And I liked that you brought up another one of the next one, pattern matching, because they all link in like almost like a special way. Like they're not.
That's it.
They're not like all the innate resources. They're not the same. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
like
they're not the same, but they need to be part of the same.
Yeah, as in what I mean by them not being the same is obviously they're different resources, but they're the way you. It's like them as a.
It's a loop.
As a type.
It's a loop.
Yeah.
It's a loop.
Yeah.
So it's
why it's in a
circular fashion, really. So if you don't have access to you don't have very easy access to your rational mind, the loop gets into a certain direction. If your pattern matching has been a bit branded and a bit damaged, not damaged, but highlighted a bit too much in that trauma part of things, it's difficult the loop is going into a bit of a strange spin in a way, okay? No, that's it really, because
so that's kind of the pattern match, isn't it, that you're alluding to again there, which like you make a pattern match and pattern matches can be as well.
Is the APET model. So the activating agent, the pattern matching, the emotion or sensation, we like to call it, because we are physical therapists, and the thought, basically. Okay, so that's in the way we look at the whole thing, and the human given the approach to mental health and clear thinking is doing. Joe Griffin and Evan Tyrrell, the way they look at it and how they coined it. We first of all try to meet a need, and we pattern match it to an emotion, and then we have a thought about it.
And a pattern match, are they all negative?
No. They are very positive. You can be rewarded for doing music and how you makes you feel, and therefore the behavior is perfect, really. So when you feel like that, you pattern match it with a need you met of something greater than you, or the fact that you remember that you were playing music in a band and you associate it with others, really. That's what brings us to rapport a bit, that need as well. Our brain is made of others as well as us, and that's a bit the peculiar stuff. It's becoming bonkers, really. We need to be able to content with other people, and it's such an interesting thing. We need to be able to interact with each other and try to have access to our different mode of reality, and the conversation need to be least emotionally loaded as possible, in order for you to be a bit truthful and not hide behind different things and all the rest, and not too resistant. And you need to be able to listen to the other person in front of you, because their mode of reality might be different than yours in a way, okay? And the way, the resource we should maybe all develop is rapport. And nowadays, well, we know where that's going, really. People are less and less able to build rapport because they have an intermediate, which is numerical type thing, really, okay? Like phones and computers, all those kind of stuff, really.
And social media.
And social media, whatever, that's another application of it, really. So the rapport is really that, that's when we maybe need to talk about polyvagal theory a little bit. Dr. Porges and his big access to the autonomic nervous system and the vagal nerve especially, and the fact that you experience in your stomach, in your subdiaphragmatic environment, sensations that are activated by how people in front of you deal with their cranial nerve muscle activation. So people's shoulder position, people's tone of voice, people's facial expression, people's eye contact or brows, all those kind of things, the facial nerve, all the oculomotor, all the glossopharyngeal, all the accessory nerve your activation of that is giving me feedback on how it feels to interact with you. So I need to be able to build rapport, and a lot of IBS symptom and thing is people maybe not quite knowing what the feeling they have in their stomach is to do with, and so they look into diet or other thing when actually and it's possible, because actually diet is going to influence that and sensitize your gut, no doubt, but a lot of it and how it's developed is for you to be able to build rapport with people. Okay, well, and then the cardiopulmonary part, which is the freeze part of the autonomic nervous system,
which is a bit different, right?
Flight, fright, and freeze. Yeah,
most people don't just freeze when they meet someone new.
Hopefully, because if they were, they would. So that's a bit trauma linked a little bit. You would think you've pattern matched the sensation or the need with the sensation, and it's really about danger. You feel there is a threat to your life. So if it's by meeting friends in the street, there's definitely a trauma behind that, and you need to plug that out a little bit. Really, your response is too strong, really. And
I know you've already said this, really, but I wanted to put it in my words and hear my voice talking. It's the social media side of things. I find it really interesting because obviously I'm very pro it in lots of ways.
Of
Share of information and knowledge, great.
That's it.
But I find it incredibly interesting when people are like, it's not the same as talking to someone face to face, or like even sending a text is stripped from context.
That's it.
And that context, regardless of how well written that text is what you were saying with the eyes, the shoulder position, the neck position, the voice.
That helps you to get context with that interaction.
And when you build a rapport with someone, someone could say the exact same words that they said to you on text
Yeah.
in person, and it could be taken in a completely different way.
Because the sensation and the emotion you're going to have in light of that is going to be different, because your brain is able to have access to different cues, basically.
Yeah. And if they have access
Which
to
contextualizes it, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if they have access to different cues, then it means that their body's response with regards to the vagus nerve could be very different.
We're the only primates to have that myelinated branch of the vagus nerve.
What the two? Is that what
so
that means?
there's two branches. There's a whole branch which is really unmyelinated, who gets access mostly to the cardiopulmonary system, and the myelinated one, who's really fast propagating signal, is supplying your gut, and we are the only primate to have that. So there's an evolutionary part of it, really. So as well as developing a sense of being conscious, we've actually developed a feedback mechanism for social interaction in order to give us more precise feedback about whether the person in front of you is a conducive person to have a social interaction with.
Rather than just on-off.
On-off.
So monkeys, for example,
that's it.
hate a static monkey or a dead monkey.
Dead monkey, yes, that's it.
But they go crazy.
Yeah.
Whereas we can, if we saw a dead human, or just a human being still, a dummy human, we have access to a different way of acting around that than going crazy.
That's it. But sometimes maybe you have to act crazy, because obviously if there's too many dead bodies piling around in a place you're in, maybe it's not the right place to be in.
Yeah.
Okay? Maybe there's a sniper around. Or
definite danger. Or high chance of.
That's it. Kali. Anyway.
Yeah, so that's kind of rapport.
That's it. We are made of, our mind is made of others. That's really quite an interesting thing. You are yourself, but it's as well made of others. So your sanity depends on others. You need to be able to build rapport. A lot of mental health problem is to do with rapport.
How does that link in? There's a number of people that I follow who say, been banging on for the last couple of years about how you become a let's say average of the 5 people you spend most time with.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Your parents, your siblings, your wife, and your best friends. Of course. How original are your thoughts?
So original.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Maybe
it could be, or it could not be.
Yeah.
The conditioning, the culture we are in, all those kind of things, really. The whole lot, really. So, that's anyway. We give plenty of example. We can have another podcast about rapport and talk about it for an hour or more.
Yeah, I think we could have a podcast about all the innate resources, probably individually.
That's it.
The next one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Dreaming.
Oh my God, dreaming.
We could definitely have a podcast about dreaming.
Dreaming would be quite an interesting one, because there's been so much bias from trying to analyze dream and all the different Freudian way of looking at it and things like that. And so there was that guy, which is a contemporary of Freud, who had a bit of a different view of what a dream is on about, but he was put on the index a little bit in the psychoanalytical society, because Freud realized that maybe he was wrong or whatever he gone about, and then he casted him aside. But there was maybe a prelude to the expectation fulfillment theory of dream, which Joe Griffin has really coined properly. Or following a bit the whole thing is the same pattern matching type ability way, really. And basically, in a nutshell, expectation, when unfulfilled, are seen by your brain as a threat. So it loads your autonomic nervous system. It loads your adrenaline pumping system. Okay, which actually puts you in that flat and fright or freeze or ever. Okay, and you try to maybe act in a world around you in order to try to change that and to try to look at how it feels and how the activating agent is pattern matched with it, and you try to fulfill it, and you try to loop the whole expectation and fulfill it in the world. But if you can't do that, you have access to your dream state in order to clean and unload your autonomic nervous system every night. Okay, and you start on a clean slate again. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. It's like a cleaning mechanism, part of the sleep. So we've got again, it's a very simplistic way of looking at it. Sleep is really quite a complicated thing. There's so many phases and things. But there's if we were summarizing, there's a part of the sleep which is we can call it slow wave sleep, which deals with your body. It's going to clean all the metabolic waste. It's going to repair tears in muscle, all those kind of stuff. You need.
That's what people call deep sleep, right?
Well, I'm not too sure.
Oh no, because it's deep and light sleep.
Sorry. That's it. The deep and light sleep. It depends a bit, okay? Yeah. So, but that's slow wave sleep, okay? So it's a maintenance, physical maintenance type thing. It re-energizes you, okay? It helps ATP. It helps all the whole lot. You need to be re-energized, okay? And then you're going to have that, and that's mostly at the start of the night. Okay, and it gets less as the night progresses towards the early morning. Okay, compared to the REM part of your dreaming sleep, it's going to be very little at the start of the night and more at the end of the night. Let's not talk about the evolutionary advantage of that and maybe the tribal part and predators, but it happens like that, and that helps you to actually unload your autonomic nervous system. The stress, the adrenergic stress you've had from the previous day can be dissipated, okay? But it requires quite a lot of energy, okay? So it's, and actually it's motivational energy it requires, okay? So it's dopamine laden a bit. You deplete a little bit your store of dopamine at the end of the night. Okay, so if you have an awful lot of unmet expectation, you're gonna need an awful lot of dreaming, and therefore when you get up in the morning, you're not super motivated. Okay, that resonates with a couple of people potentially out there. So maybe teenagers would be ones who get up, maybe not so much in the morning to the distress of their parents, because at 12 o'clock teenagers are still sleeping. But when they get up, they can't be asked, basically, okay? They've had so much REM, they're trying to start to fulfill their needs using resources that they're not very good at doing, and therefore at night they have to dream it in order to be able to keep the slate open, but it really, or clean, but it's really quite tiring for them.
And not be in a constant state of anxiety about
that's
it, right?
About the whole thing, okay?
Yeah. And again, linking this to maybe some of the conversations that are already out there about sleep and tiredness. I think it was Dr. Chatterjee who was saying, are you tired, or are you just not doing something that you really want to do or is really meaningful to you? And he didn't say the word motivation, but it's like it's motivation, because
that's it.
Even if you can't be asked to do anything and you wake up in the morning and you're tired, it could be actual tiredness, and it probably is slightly that maybe, but it could also be lack of motivation. But the moment that someone comes along and it's like, here's your favorite pop star, he's just come into your room, or you've just won £1 million, all of a sudden stuff changes because you've got loads of motivation because something exciting's happened. But when you're 18 or or any age, and you have a load of unfulfilled expectations and you're dreaming loads, which a lot of people, especially who are in pain or have mental health issues, will find that they're dreaming quite a lot. Then generally when they're waking up in the morning, they're probably not that motivated to go to a job that they're not too keen on, or to have another day contending with stuff that
That's it. A colleague at work who's bullying you or those kind of stuff is not going to be gone, but you need a plan. That's the main thing, really.
So is that the, I guess, tangible part of dreaming? Like, as in, is it that you need to not necessarily focus on the content of your dreaming, but the fact that you're dreaming quite a lot might allude you to some things that you need to make a plan for?
That's it. But there is a metaphorical representation of the need that, so let's say your competence is, your sense of how much competence you should be allocated to at work is undermined by your manager, for example, every Monday morning, and after at night, on a Monday night, you're dreaming about doing the best sushi, or going and do carving, or I don't know, like things, because you've done, your brain knows about how competent you are at the end of the day, okay? Because that's where we talk about ego and self a little bit, really, and a whole Freudian concept of self. So self is who you are. And ego is who you think you are, and a discrepancy between the two. So if your boss is implying that you're not very competent, is actually in changing a bit your ego, okay, the dial. So it drops how much competence you have, it drops how much competence you think you have, because it arouses you in front of others, or arouses you full stop, but arouses you even more because it's in front of others, and the emotion of guilt or shame or whatever associated with it is actually dropping how much competence you have compared to how much competence you really have. And that gap between the two is what stresses you, and that's what the dream is trying to actually diminish every day. Okay? And yes, of course, in the REM state as well, you have to rehearse a lot of the templates for survival. You have like reflexes and different things. Your genetic integrity has to be kind of managed, and it's managed during the REM as well. So that's another thing, really. But the metaphorical representation of the need you think has not been fulfilled is being helped during the dream state in order to clean the slate. So you're not emotionally aroused too much when you get up in the morning. It's quite an interesting thing, because that's definitely what links the body and the mind. That sleep part.
Part of what links the body and the mind.
Or the body and the mind,
or the
link,
mind and the body,
to that it doesn't, or
the
mind.
The body, or the
body,
bind.
the bind, or whatever, exactly, however we want to put it, really. But the sleep is really kind of linking those two. So if you have been depressed for a while, or and your perception of reality is a bit warped, and you don't maybe put in place resources because you don't have a plan type thing too much of how to go about doing it, or the plan you have is actually preventing that from happening, and you're not really changing your plan, you tend to have quite a lot of REM, so you don't repair your body too much, and after a while you end up having physical symptoms. Or anyway, so that's, we start to have a bit of an explanation of, and if we talk about people's experience of how they feel about certain needs not being met, all of a sudden we get a bit of an idea about what's happening in their lives in a way, and whether they can actually change a plan. it's limitation at the end, really. So we love Mr. Peterson and his lobsters and his kind of evolutionary explanation about dopamine and serotonin and endorphin, because it's really a bit what it's on about, really. You need to be orientated in the world when you're and that's really quite an interesting way of looking at it, really, because that gives us a bit of or it gives me at least a really good sense that limitations are great. That's another thing. We need to be limited in a way. So you have to have a plan. You have to be able to orientate yourself. You need to be able to go from A to B. And that's dopamine, really. And it happens when triploblastic starts compared to diploblastic. So diploblastic will be sponges and jellyfish and corals. Type thing. Cnidaires are quite good diploblastics. They got only 2 embryological layers. The world brings food to you, or you're taken by the world to the food, by the current. So the jellyfish, it moves a bit, but it's mostly the current who takes him, okay? And the coral sits there and waits for the current to bring the food, okay? It doesn't need to be orientated. Okay, but once you add muscles to evolutionary sense, you start to have a front and a back, and therefore you need to go from A to B, and that's dopamine. Okay, the drive that brings you from A to B is dopamine, and that's a while back. I think it's 600 million or 700 million year old already. Okay, so almost a billion year ago. That circuitry is in. That circuitry part of our brain has been around in the template, and the pattern matching to that has been there for a billion years. Let's say 800. People are going to comment about the stuff and say it's 763 million years, but who cares? Okay, so a while back. Okay?
It was a long time.
Long time ago. Okay, and then all of a sudden, when it's like that, you have to contact with others. And you need to become gregarious. So arthropods would be quite a good example. And Mr. Peterson talks about lobsters and mostly about serotonin. Okay, so the circuitry we have of getting in that competence hierarchy is
getting in a competence.
Or one of many. Or no, getting in all the competence hierarchies.
But a couple,
a
selection.
Okay. My language needs to be contended using serotonin. Okay, the more serotonin you have, the more you feel competent into that set of competence pyramid or hierarchies, whatever. Okay. And that's arthropods, so that's 400 million year olds, really. So it's before the dinosaurs, well before the dinosaurs, okay? And lastly, but not least, once you have a plan and you put your tools in the right fashion and your resources in the right fashion, in the right order to fulfill certain needs, you need to be rewarded. And that's endorphins. And that's quite a recent thing. It's only 70 million years. It's like the rise of the mammals, potentially. Okay? So, end of the dinosaur, 66 million years ago. Okay? KT boundary type thing, but a bit before the mammals are there, very small creatures, but they've got endorphins to reward them. So the behavior you display and trying to fulfill your need and using certain of your resources is actually incentivizing you by giving you a reward. Okay? And it's endorphin, so it's produced by your brain, which actually helps you to deal with pain. That's the side effect of the reward, in a way, okay? Because when you put your tools in order to achieve something, you might actually hurt yourself. You might actually burn a few feathers or hairs and break a few bones and all those kind of stuff. So you need endorphin, and that's really that whole contention with limitation there is really. So, and that's what we're trying to we try to extract all the different things. The dopamine is interesting. If you got a plan, you need to be able to fulfill a need in a balanced fashion. That's quite a good plan. But there's a set of needs that need to be fulfilled in a balanced fashion. Yes, there's more than one need. That's the problem really. There's 10 or whatever, Maslow, whatever, whoever. The model we use is 10 or 9. Okay? And there are a few tools. And the tools are the resources we have. Yes, of course, you can use your knife and you can carve things, or you can drill, or you can do your eyelashes. It's tools, really, okay? You can cook or make fire. Matches are good tools, and pen knives are the same. But
these are a different type of tools.
Exactly. That's emotional tools a little, which are linked to your physical health as well.
And those physical tools that fulfill physical things, maybe like cooking, are also linked to your emotional health. So even, I don't know if you did bring it back round to the example within Dreaming of being a sushi chef, but where you were talking about your actual competence compared to where your boss is challenging your competence, exactly. And how that affects your
how much you think your view. That's it.
So your boss challenges your competence, and that can move your view of your competence
below
or up.
Because your boss can praise you for something you think you should not be praised about,
or your boss can maybe rightly question your competence, and you go the other way, and you're like, I am really competent,
of course.
rather than having maybe a observing self view on it.
That's it.
But
you have an emotion. You have an emotion from it. You have an emotion from it. Yeah.
But in that dream, you're not dreaming about maybe your job as a web developer. You're dreaming about being a sushi chef. And being competent at that.
That's it.
And that dream is fulfilling your emotional need for competence.
That's it.
And the level of what you actually are.
Resets it. Yeah. Because the discrepancy between how much you think you fulfill the need compared to how much the need is failed is what stresses you, and it's what produces all the interesting adrenal hormones. So your adrenal gland is going to produce cortisol, especially. There's DHEA, there's so many more, noradrenaline, all the rest and thing, okay? And that's going to affect your way of dealing with inflammation, clotting, and immune system. Really, it's really super. It's all start to be all linked, so that's why it's great to be able to pluck it out a little bit and segregate it with the framework. Really, we love the framework because it's a framework. It helps us to articulate our thoughts and our view of reality a little bit better, really, and it helps us really. Because imagination, there's plenty. You don't have to do it like anybody else. You do it like you want to do it. You've got plenty of control and volition, and it's not a problem. So there's no set way of doing it.
We were talking before this podcast about group labels, and there's a guy, entrepreneur Gary Vaynerchuk, who I really like, and he was talking about how he was essentially talking about the individual and talking about how you don't need to find a niche within. He was talking about in business sense. You don't need to find a niche because you are already a niche. You just need to figure out what you actually want to do, what you're good at, and there's a big marriage of different things going on. Like you're an osteopath. You also like stargazing, taking photos, doing other things, blah blah blah.
Be a parent.
That makes Alexi NL. And I have my things that I do, and that makes Elliot Greenman.
But it's not about only what you do; it's how you feel about what you do.
Yeah.
But which is quite important because that's what sometimes. Anyway.
But with stuff like imagination or any of these innate resources, it's not about them telling you how to use them. It's about you learning how to use them and using them in your own individual, your very unique Elliot Greenman, Alexi NL way. I don't use my imagination in the same way as you do.
Thank God.
And for you.
Or for you.
And for me. And that's why the framework is so unbelievable. Like, it's so genius. So great.
Well, it can be applied in many ways, but remember, it's APET, A-P-E-T. You pattern match the need with an emotion. That's the thing. That's really a key.
You pattern match a need with a emotion.
A-P-E-T or E-S-T for us.
Sensation. And 7 is emotion. I guess we kind of really merged 6, 7, and then 8, and then all of them basically. But is there anything you wanted to say individually or specifically about the innate resource of emotion?
No, well, that's what we talked about a bit. It's that is to try to find a bit of a list of all the emotions you have in certain circumstances. So you need to try to remember your memory, how, or observing self, how it made you feel. What the thing of doing stargazing makes me feel. Or how dealing with a difficult patient who's really angry is making me feel. All the rest like that, I think is that thing really. When we evoke going to work, how it makes you feel. Because the problem is going to work is fulfilling a need for financial security, a need for... so when you take the subset of the whole lot, it's not so much about going to work. It's talking to your boss having a raise, or talking to your colleague about how much they earn and how much you earn and whole thing. So it's about your financial security and how does it feel to actually talk about that? Because that's really quite important. Because you get a bit mixed up about the emotional need and the emotion a little bit at times. So you need to clarify the whole thing, and you need to, whether it's being shy or guilty or shame or feeling superior or in awe or attracted to somebody, or
and that's the emotion.
That's the emotion. Yeah.
And that could be linked to essentially any emotional need, right? So you could be in awe about, I don't know, your competence.
That's it.
And then, but you could also be sad about your competence.
Yeah, that's it.
But then you could be in awe about intimacy.
Yeah, that's it.
But you could also be sad about your lack, maybe, of intimacy.
And you might have had many emotions with that one need associated with it, really.
Yeah.
But it's the behavior that it leads to that might not be conducive for you to be able to fulfill it again, really. Oh, I used to be really sad about my intimacy, and then when you're with somebody else, you were expecting it to be sad, and therefore it's not, and then you think, oh, maybe it's not the same, and a whole lot, so you get a bit confused about... I mean, it's quite interesting.
It's an interesting way to work through the problem, but it doesn't mean it's straightforward, right?
It doesn't need that it's straightforward. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. We are complicated, but
on top of being complex.
Yeah. But it would be interesting to de-arouse ourselves, because now there's a level of arousal which is quite an important part of it. Really, we need to pluck ourselves from the focused attention we have on the subject. Because if you think about privacy too much, well, there's other trees who need to be attended in the forest, really. So it locks your attention on the one thing. The heroin addict is not so much addicted to heroin, but is addicted to how it feels, and how it feels it fulfills one of his needs, and he headsbutts his grandma for £5, really. And he doesn't really realize, really, because he's so fixed on the whole lot, he's not able to observe himself on the whole lot, really. He is completely drawn into the addiction, the internal negative focus of attention, basically. and you've got external focus of attention, and you've got which are positive or negative, and you've got internal and external focus of attention, which are negative or positive. And that's quite peculiar, really. So running is a great way to get your headspace. So that can be a great external need of an external focus of attention, because you see all the birds and the plants and the whole lot, and it is a bit as well about an internal a positive internal focus of attention. But when you have to have too much privacy and you're running 25 hours every week on top of running a job and the whole lot and thing, you have to sacrifice quite a lot of the rest of your interaction with others, and that becomes that you turned it into a positive internal focus of attention to a negative internal focus of attention, which becomes quite negative, basically, and it's a bit addictive.
That positive action went through a feedback loop that ended up it being turning a little bit negative because it's at the detriment for some other emotional needs.
Other emotional thing, and the fact that you're fixed on a whole lot, really, so you can't really take yourself out of it, really. You get up in the morning and there's only one thing you think is about going running, really, and now it makes you feel. But running is not maybe helping you to do other stuff, really. You can't really work and run, really. It can help you to be less aroused by actually going running. But if you have to run to be able to function, it's a bit tricky. You need to be able to do other stuff, really. That's when the LP gets a bit scratched, really, and you got only one groove in your LP. Bit boring.
Gets boring
quick, exactly. No, well done. Thank you, Elliot, for...
Thank you, Alexei.
Yeah, I like those cards. They really help us to visualize the stuff. The graphics are really good.
Yeah.
Well done, Alec.
And his daughter.
Was it his daughter who did that?
Yeah.
Cool.
His daughter illustrated them.
Superb.
And I said to him I was going to buy some when I last had a session with him.
Yeah.
And he's got some videos as well that explain how to use them.
Good. So he mentioned, because
I think I'm going to get the whole lot.
With the work he does for coaching, I think he loves that, and it's great because you can almost visualize a whole lot, really, and you can have your needs in the middle and or your needs around, and then your resources in the middle, and you can really set it, and you can really see the whole lot.
And with the amazing illustrations, and then with the actual touching them, I can't remember what they call that, but the actual connection, the kinesthetic side of it, touching them and moving them around and linking them together. It's quite a powerful tool, I think.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
because it's difficult to once you got it in your head, I think it's a bit easier already. But to start with, when you're not familiar with the concept and thing, I think it's really it's cool.
Yeah, I think it takes quite a while to be familiar with the concept, though, because we've been talking about this for a long time, and these innate resources, although we haven't sat down and spoken about them like we have. Obviously, we did this podcast before, but like now, it's taken me quite a while to become familiar with them, and even now, it's still something that it's not second nature.
No. It's not
so
very easy. You need to repeat. Is that Hebbian conditioning a bit? You need to repeat the whole lot. You need to, and obviously there are certain resources you're not very good with, really. And it's because maybe you don't. So that's the brilliant part of it, really. If you look at Rational Man and it's fine, and saying like I do a bit with things, there's like 7 out of the 8 needs I'm maybe relatively good with, but maybe the emotions are not something I'm very good with, really. Therefore, I don't know about them very well until you know a bit more about the whole lot, and you're able to go into your observing self and be like, okay, that's what it's on about. That's how it makes me feel, really. And the feeling is the emotion. And that's the whole polyvagal thing, a bit like how it feels in your gut, really. That's a sensation, but it's basically linked to an emotion, really. And that's what's been pattern matched to one of the activating agents, which is one of the need or several of the needs that need to be fulfilled. And that's pretty genius. And that's completely neurophysiological. That's the way the brain, the sequence of the brain going. APET. That's where like behavior, cognitive advice and those kind of things and cognitive thing is interesting, but it's just a thought. Unless you've salted the activating agent, the pattern matching, the emotion or sensation, the thought, it's interesting really, but it's not really a thing. Okay,
it's going to be a cognitive or it's going to be a conscious intervention every time you have to try and control that thought.
But that's it.
But often, by the time that thought is there, you're probably too contextually focused on whatever it is, that you aren't able to actually have access to observing self-rational mind, imagine whatever, to control that thought.
That's it.
And so it's almost like it's going deeper down the path.
That's it.
Behind the thought, behind the emotion, using the emotion, and then going behind with the pattern match.
That's it.
So that you don't even end up having that thought.
Or when you have it, you know that it's not really relevant in a way because there's a behavioral part of it as well, really.
Yeah.
Okay. So the CBT part of it is interesting, but it's even more powerful. The CBT intervention is so much more powerful when you know about the activating agent and how you pattern match it to your emotion, really. And that becomes super interesting, really. And then the thought, once you've unplugged the whole thing and you see the loop happening again and again, there must be a reason why it happens again and again. So maybe you need a bit of psychoanalytical kind of work to unplug your mode of reality, whether it's others who are the problem or whether it's you who is the problem. And maybe that's because of that you're not able to find the whole thing, really, and the whole solution, and it happens again, really, and you go back into that rabbit hole again and again because your view of the whole reality is warped. But before that, you need to de-arouse yourself, and to de-arouse yourself, you need to know which emotion has been linked with which activating agent.
Which isn't always straightforward.
And that's why it's great to have somebody else to help you to do the whole lot. But you have your observing self. So learning how to de-arouse yourself and learning all the technique we're going to talk about pain, especially in our course, we're going to help people to de-arouse themselves. And the least aroused you are, the more you have access to your observing self, and the more you can have an idea about how the whole shenanigan or schmilblick is actually working. But it's about arousal, it's about stress, it's about that focus of attention. That's what pain is all about. Pain. So pain is an internal negative focus of attention. But we could maybe argue that it's actually an internal positive focus of attention. If you understand what pain is, and we're going to maybe give people a possibility to make pain a positive internal focus of attention. And that's quite a positive thing, in my opinion. To be continued.
To be continued.
Yeah. The journey, the adventure. The call to adventure.
Yeah. Should we leave it there?
Yeah. Thank you, Elliot.
Thank you, Alexei.
This morning.